What if everything you've believed about Prince Harry's family, the picture-perfect images of a young father cradling baby Archie, the fairy tale christening photos, the endless headlines about a modern royal family, was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion? What if the truth was far more scandalous, more unsettling, and more devastating than any royal drama you've ever heard before? Tonight, we peel back the curtain, step into the palace shadows, and face the chilling moment when King Charles himself looked into the cameras, live, and shattered the illusion with 5 words that changed everything. That's the moment where this story begins. And you, sitting there, probably think you've heard it all. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the book, the constant headlines of Harry and Meghan's rebellion. But ask yourself, have you ever seen Harry truly panic? Not just nervous, not just uncomfortable, but raw, trembling, visibly collapsing under the weight of a truth he cannot deny? Because when the king spoke, panic washed over him in a way we've never seen before. It was as if, for the first time, Prince Harry realized he could lose not just his titles, not just his money, but the one thing he thought could never be taken from him, his son, or what he believed was his son. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine that. Imagine a father who suddenly hears the words, "This child is not yours." It's not just a scandal. It's an earthquake that destroys identity, legacy, and lineage in one strike. And remember, we're not talking about any family. This is the British monarchy, a 1,000-year institution built entirely on bloodline. Every branch, every generation, every coronation oath hinges on one unbreakable rule: blood matters. And if Archie's blood doesn't match Harry's, everything changes. But before we get there, before we even dare touch the royal veins with the scalpel of truth, let's rewind. Because this revelation didn't explode in isolation. No, the seeds of this bombshell were planted long ago, hidden in whispers, covered by carefully staged smiles, and dismissed as conspiracy theories. And yet, haven't you ever wondered? Haven't you looked at certain photographs and thought, something doesn't add up? Why does Archie rarely appear in public compared to other royal children? Why do his early pictures look oddly inconsistent, some claiming he resembled Harry, others swearing he didn't? Why the constant obsession with privacy from a couple that never stopped selling their version of the truth to Netflix, Spotify, and the world's media? You see, the irony is cruel. Meghan and Harry left the royal family to control their narrative. But what if the narrative was never truly theirs to control? What if King Charles, the man they accused of cruelty, indifference, and coldness, was quietly waiting, biding his time, holding the one truth that would eventually silence them both? And when the moment came, he didn't need to shout. He didn't need to smear. He simply let the truth speak for itself. Now, let's not pretend the world hasn't speculated about Archie's origins before. The whispers of surrogacy, the rumors of fertility struggles, the strange gaps in public appearances. But here's the thing. Speculation is one thing. A royal acknowledgement is another. And when Charles leaned forward and exposed Archie's shocking true identity, it wasn't just a family matter anymore. It became a constitutional crisis. A crisis of trust. A crisis of loyalty. A crisis that could unravel the monarchy itself. Let me ask you this. What happens when the king admits that his grandson, the boy once seen as the hope of modern royalty, is not truly royal by blood? What happens when Harry, once the spare, suddenly realizes he has no true heir? What happens when Meghan, who fought so hard to cement her place in history, discovers that history itself is rejecting her? These are the questions tearing through palace walls, media studios, and even living rooms around the world. And tonight, we walk into that storm together. Picture the scene. Cameras rolling. The king, calm but cold. Harry, shifting uncomfortably, sweating under the lights. Meghan, still as stone, her silence almost louder than words. The atmosphere electric, like the seconds before a lightning strike. Then, Charles speaks. His voice doesn't quiver. His eyes don't wander. Every syllable lands with the weight of centuries. Archie Harrison is not his son. The silence that follows. Deafening. Because in that silence, a dynasty trembles. Harry's reaction? Panic. Pure, visible panic. Imagine every muscle in his face tightening, his eyes darting left and right, his lips parting as if to speak, but finding no words. This is a man who survived war, who endured years of media hounding, who stood beside his brother at his mother's funeral. And yet, nothing prepared him for this moment. Because you can fight the press. You can fight the palace. But how do you fight blood? How do you fight DNA? And now let's dig deeper. Why now? Why did Charles wait until this moment to make the revelation? Was it vengeance? Was it justice? Or was it the monarchy protecting itself from a dangerous lie that had gone too far? Remember, Charles has spent his entire life preparing to safeguard the crown. He has seen scandals destroy reputations, affairs topple marriages, and rumors nearly dethrone monarchs. But this was different. This was about the core of monarchy itself, the truth of who is royal and who is not. Think about it. If Archie is not Harry's son, then the entire narrative Meghan and Harry built, escaping the palace for their own family, crumbles. Every headline, every interview, every accusation of racism, every plea for privacy, all of it collapses under one brutal truth. The story they sold to the world was incomplete at best, deceptive at worst. And suddenly, the victims start to look like manipulators. Suddenly, the monarchy they accused of cruelty looks like the betrayed party. And what about the people? You, me, millions around the globe who tuned in to watch this family saga like a Netflix drama. We laughed. We cried. We argued. We picked sides. But were we all played? Were we watching characters in a carefully scripted play, unaware that the most important line hadn't even been delivered yet? That's the cruelty of it. The truth wasn't hidden in some dusty archive. It was right there, in Archie himself. And when the king forced it into the open, there was no going back. Let's pause and ask ourselves, why does this matter so much? Why are we, in 2025, still captivated by royal drama? Because deep down, the monarchy is more than a family. It's a mirror. It reflects our ideas of truth, loyalty, betrayal, and identity. When a father is told his child is not his, we feel the ache. When a dynasty faces collapse over secrets, we recognize the fragility of our own lives. This isn't just about Harry, Meghan, Charles, or Archie. This is about what happens when lies finally meet the light. But here's the cruelest twist. This revelation doesn't just hurt Harry. It haunts the monarchy itself. Because if a prince can be fooled, if a king must expose his own bloodline on live television, then what does that say about the stability of the crown? About the future of William, George, Charlotte, Louis? About the very idea that monarchy is eternal? Suddenly, what looked like a personal scandal becomes a constitutional one. And suddenly, the question isn't just who is Archie? It's what is the monarchy? And as Harry sat there, panicking, sweating, trembling, a son stripped of certainty and a father robbed of legacy, the world leaned closer to their screens. Because we all knew something bigger was coming. Something darker. Because when Charles finished his words, when Meghan's silence turned into strategy, when Harry's panic shifted into fury, what came next would change everything. And no one, not even the king himself, saw it coming. Every royal scandal begins with a performance. But no one expected this performance to turn into a full-blown tragedy, played out under the unforgiving glare of live television. The palace had promised a grand public moment, a show of unity, tradition, and strength, a king, his sons, and the next generation of royals standing together for the cameras. It was supposed to be symbolic, carefully orchestrated. But beneath the polished choreography, something darker lurked, waiting to rip through the surface. And when it finally did, the stage wasn't a celebration, it was a battlefield. Let's set the scene properly. Imagine the courtyard, polished marble floors glinting under carefully staged lights, golden insignias gleaming, and a crowd gathered with an air of restrained awe. Reporters from every major network had their cameras fixed on the podium. The royal standard fluttered in the background. It wasn't just another royal engagement, it was a showcase. A live broadcast streamed across the globe, watched by millions. This was meant to be the monarchy's answer to criticism, the king's declaration of continuity, a living portrait of legacy. But even as the cameras panned across the crowd, capturing smiles and polite clapping, tension slithered through the air. Insiders whispered of last-minute changes to the script, hushed conversations behind closed doors, and Harry's restless pacing before the event began. If you looked closely, you'd notice the way his hands twitched, the way his jaw clenched as though he was bracing for impact. He wasn't calm. He wasn't comfortable. He was waiting for something he couldn't control. Now, ask yourself this. How often do royal events deviate from their script? Almost never. They thrive on predictability. Every bow, every speech, every pause is rehearsed. Yet this event was different. You could feel it in the silence between applause, in the quick glances exchanged by aides, in the way Meghan's smile seemed fixed rather than natural. It was the kind of silence before a storm, the kind of atmosphere where you know something's about to go wrong, but you don't know when or how. And then, the king appeared. Charles, dressed in regal authority, radiated a stillness that only comes from a lifetime of public duty. He didn't need to raise his voice or flash a smile. He carried the weight of history in his very posture. But as he stepped forward, there was a heaviness about him, a stiffness, as though the words he was about to deliver were heavier than any crown. The stage was set. The world was watching. But behind the pageantry, betrayal was about to bleed into the open. Let's rewind a little further, because this wasn't just any broadcast. It wasn't simply about parading the next generation of royals. This moment had been building for years. Since Harry and Meghan's departure, the monarchy has been under siege, criticized, questioned, undermined by the couple's revelations and accusations. From Oprah to Netflix, the Sussexes painted themselves as victims of an archaic institution. They accused the palace of racism, cruelty, indifference. They positioned themselves as rebels of compassion, while the monarchy clung to silence. But silence is never empty. Silence can be strategy. So, when Charles called this event, it was billed as a show of reconciliation, a chance for father and son to appear together, to assure the world that the monarchy, though fractured, was still intact. Yet behind closed doors, insiders reveal, the king had already made a decision. He wasn't simply going to show unity. He was going to show truth. And that truth was a weapon. Now think about Harry for a second. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin. The soldier who fought in Afghanistan. The man who said he wanted nothing more than to protect his wife and children. He carried years of resentment against the institution. But in that moment, standing under the hot lights with cameras aimed at his every breath, he looked less like a rebel prince and more like a cornered man. Did he know what was coming? Did whispers reach his ears before the king's words shattered him? Or was this the first time he realized that the monarchy's silence had never been weakness? It had been preparation? The performance began as expected. Speeches about service. Platitudes about family. Smiles carefully plastered across faces. The cameras drank it all in. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone shifted. Charles's speech grew sharper, his gaze heavier. And then, as if deciding that enough was enough, he broke from the script. His voice cut through the air, measured but unflinching. The words themselves were simple, but their weight was immeasurable. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He declared, "That's the power of monarchy, the ability to turn truth into proclamation." And as those words echoed across the courtyard and into millions of living rooms, you could almost feel the ground shift. Harry froze. Meghan blinked, but didn't flinch. The crowd gasped, though quickly muffled by the shock of what they'd just heard. And suddenly, the entire performance crumbled. This wasn't a show of unity. It was an execution, a royal execution by truth. And here's where it gets darker. Because the king didn't just expose a personal betrayal. He exposed a constitutional one. In the monarchy, children are not just children. They're heirs, symbols, carriers of history. If Archie wasn't truly Harry's son, then what did that mean for the monarchy's lineage? What did it mean for the legitimacy of succession? This wasn't just a family scandal. It was a crisis that could shake the monarchy's very foundations. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Reporters whispered to each other, already drafting headlines that would ignite the world. But the cameras didn't cut away. They stayed, zoomed in on Harry's paling face, Meghan's rigid silence, and Charles's unyielding expression. Ask yourself, what would you do if your entire world, your identity, your fatherhood, was ripped apart in front of millions? Would you fight back? Would you deny it? Would you collapse? Harry did none of those things. He panicked. His eyes darted to Meghan, searching for reassurance, searching for some anchor in the chaos. But Meghan remained stone-faced, her silence almost rehearsed. as if she had prepared for this day in ways Harry never had. The royal stage, once a place of performance and illusion, had transformed into a gladiatorial arena. And in that arena, Harry wasn't the warrior. He was the sacrifice. The scene ended not with applause, not with smiles, but with silence. A silence so heavy, so suffocating, that it felt like a verdict. And in that silence, one question echoed louder than the king's words. If Archie isn't Harry's son, then whose son is he? But what came next would not just challenge paternity. It would challenge loyalty, strategy, and the very survival of the monarchy itself. What does panic look like when it belongs to a prince? Not the kind of panic you and I feel when we lose our keys or miss a deadline, but the kind that shakes a man to his very core. The kind that strips away royal titles, polished interviews, and polished smiles, leaving nothing but raw, naked fear. That's what we saw in Harry the moment King Charles spoke. But the truth is, Harry's nervous energy began long before the king's words thundered across that courtyard. It started the moment he stepped onto that stage, every twitch, every glance, every forced smile betraying a storm raging inside him. You know the look. Eyes that won't settle, hands that refuse to stay still, posture that screams discomfort even while trying to appear strong. That was Harry. And yet, this wasn't just stage fright. This was a man who had spent years speaking before millions. At Invictus Games, at charity galas, even on live television interviews with Oprah, public speaking was not the problem. The problem was what he knew, or thought he knew, was coming. Let me paint the scene more vividly. The cameras rolled. The lights beamed hot across his forehead. Meghan stood beside him, perfectly composed, her stillness contrasting Harry's every jitter. William, in the corner of the stage, looked poised, collected, like a man born to absorb the pressure of scrutiny. But Harry? He was the outlier. His jaw shifted constantly, grinding as if the weight of truth sat right behind his teeth. His hands rubbed together, palms clammy under the heat. And his eyes, they darted. Not casually, not curiously. They darted like a man searching for an escape route. Audience, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a man try to hide a secret, but fail because his body betrayed him? That's what Harry was in that moment. A body screaming louder than his voice ever could. Now, here's the contradiction. Harry has always been described as the relatable royal. The one who laughs too loudly, jokes too much, wears his heart on his sleeve. The world loved him for being human in a family of stone-faced tradition. But here's the irony. That very humanity betrayed him on this stage. Where William's royal training allowed him to mask emotion, Harry's nervous energy spilled into the open, exposing a vulnerability that the cameras devoured. And don't think the king didn't notice. Charles has spent his life studying people, reading them, calculating. He knew the cameras weren't just pointed at him. They were pointed at Harry. Every twitch, every stammer, every nervous glance added fuel to the fire Charles was about to ignite. It was as if Harry's panic was part of the theater, part of the royal execution. Let's pause and ask the uncomfortable question. Did Harry already know what was coming? Or was his nervous energy born from suspicion? You don't panic like that over nothing. You don't sweat bullets over a ceremonial event unless you sense the stage is about to become a trap. And Harry's life, let's be honest, has been one long lesson in traps. Trapped by the press, trapped by duty, trapped by his own contradictions. But here's the cruelest detail of all. Meghan didn't match his panic. She stood firm, unflinching, as though she knew the storm would pass, or as though she had rehearsed for it. That contrast, Harry's visible unraveling beside Meghan's stone-like composure, wasn't just striking. It was damning. The audience at home couldn't miss it. One looked guilty, cornered, broken. The other looked calculating, prepared, as though she had already accepted this moment as inevitable. Harry's nervous energy also spilled into his attempts at composure. He tried to smile, but the smile collapsed quickly into a grimace. He attempted to laugh softly at Charles's lighter lines, but his voice cracked. He clasped his hands in front of him, then behind him, then in his pockets, unable to anchor his limbs. Each movement shouted what his lips wouldn't dare say. I am not ready for this. And here's where the human element hits hardest. Imagine being told your child's legitimacy is under fire. Imagine knowing your father, the King of England, is about to question the very blood of your son. Wouldn't you panic too? Wouldn't you unravel, even just a little? That's why Harry's nervous energy didn't just look like fear. It looked like heartbreak, denial, and desperation stitched into one trembling frame. But it wasn't just Harry's body language that gave him away. It was the way he looked at Meghan. Again and again, his eyes flickered toward her, searching, pleading. Did she know? Would she intervene? Would she protect him from the avalanche? But Meghan didn't move. She didn't whisper reassurance. She didn't grab his hand. Her silence was thunderous, and Harry's panic grew louder with every second of her stillness. And let's not forget the audience in that courtyard. Those closest to the stage noticed the tremors. They whispered, exchanged glances, pulled out phones to document what was unfolding. Insiders later said Harry looked like a man waiting for execution. That wasn't hyperbole. It was truth etched across his every gesture. Now, here's the irony. Harry has always described the monarchy as a cage. He once said he felt trapped in the institution, but claimed Meghan set him free. Yet here he was, standing beside her, looking more trapped than ever before. Isn't it curious? Isn't it strange how the very freedom he fought for seemed to collapse in that moment, leaving him exposed, defenseless, a prisoner of truth? The middle of this chapter crescendos with the cruel realization. Harry's nervous energy wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. His instincts were screaming at him because he knew, deep down, that Charles wasn't here to reconcile. He was here to reveal. And Harry's panic was the foreshadowing the cameras caught before the blow landed. Now, let's talk about what panic means in this context. In everyday life, panic makes us sloppy. We drop things. We stammer. We sweat. But in the life of a royal, panic is political dynamite. One wrong expression, one nervous tick, one trembling hand, and the press builds a narrative that lasts forever. That's exactly what happened. Harry's nervous energy was captured, broadcasted, and immortalized. It wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was evidence. Evidence that he feared the truth. And the audience at home? They didn't miss it. Social media lit up instantly. Tweets and comments flew across the internet. Why does Harry look terrified? He's sweating bullets. Something's wrong. The people, without even hearing the king's revelation, sensed the scandal from Harry's panic alone. That's how powerful body language can be. By the end of the stage performance, before Charles dropped the bombshell, Harry was already defeated in the eyes of millions. His nervous energy told the story before the king even confirmed it. His panic was the prelude, the drumroll before the crash of truth. But here's the cliffhanger, the twist that deepens the wound. Harry's panic wasn't just about the revelation itself. It was about what came after. Because in that moment, Harry wasn't just losing control of the narrative. He was losing control of his own identity, his fatherhood, his legacy. He wasn't panicking over what Charles was about to say. He was panicking over what it meant for the rest of his life. And as Charles leaned forward, ready to strike with the truth, Harry's panic transformed from nervous energy into something far darker, sheer, suffocating dread. What came next would turn dread into devastation and silence into strategy. What does silence mean when it's coming from Meghan Markle? Is it dignity? Is it composure? Or is it calculation? Because on that stage, as Harry twitched and fidgeted and panicked beside her, Meghan's silence wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the kind of silence you use to avoid attention. It was the silence of a woman who knew something no one else dared to say. And in that silence, she held more power than words ever could. Imagine it. Cameras zoomed in. The king had already shifted the atmosphere. The crowd's excitement had curdled into tension, and Harry looked like a man unraveling before the world's eyes. But Meghan? Meghan didn't flinch. She didn't move a muscle. Her face, calm, stone-like, almost regal in its stillness, became the sharpest contrast to her husband's panic. That contrast told its own story. If Harry's body screamed fear, Meghan's silence whispered control. Now ask yourself, was she controlling her fear or controlling the narrative? Meghan has always been a master of image. Think back to her interviews, her Netflix documentaries, her magazine spreads. Every detail, from wardrobe to background lighting, was meticulously crafted to tell a story. So why would this be any different? On the day when the monarchy itself seemed to expose her deepest secret, she didn't crack. She didn't cry. She didn't even attempt to soothe Harry's panic. Instead, she gave the performance of a lifetime, silence. And let's not pretend the cameras didn't notice. They lingered on her face, desperate to capture even the smallest flicker of emotion. But Meghan gave them nothing. No twitch, no smirk, no glare, just a mask. But masks tell their own stories. Masks aren't built overnight, they're rehearsed. Let me ask you this directly. Do you believe Meghan didn't know this was coming? Do you believe she stood there, unprepared, caught off guard? Or do you think, like many insiders have hinted, that she had long anticipated the day when the monarchy would fight back? Because if you look closely, that silence wasn't shock. It was readiness. Here's the contradiction. Meghan has always claimed she just wanted her voice. She accused the palace of silencing her, of refusing to let her speak. She built her brand on breaking that silence. Oprah, Spotify, Netflix, spare. But here, on the most explosive stage of her life, she chose silence. She didn't defend Harry. She didn't refute Charles. She didn't even offer a comforting touch to her husband. And that choice raises the question, was her silence a betrayal? Consider this. Harry searched for her. His eyes flickered toward Meghan again and again, silently begging her to step in, to say something, to rescue him from the avalanche of humiliation. But she never met his gaze. She didn't flinch when he panicked. She didn't break character when his hands trembled. She left him exposed. Alone. Was it loyalty to the truth? Or was it strategy? Because here's the cruel irony. By saying nothing, Meghan may have said everything. The world saw her silence not as ignorance, but as knowledge. If she truly had no idea what Charles was about to reveal, wouldn't she have reacted? Wouldn't she have gasped, protested, even feigned outrage? But her mask-like stillness suggested something different, that she had been preparing for this moment all along. And let's remember Meghan's history. This is a woman who entered the monarchy fully aware of its games. She played her own PR strategies, carefully timed leaks, calculated interviews. She knew how to stay one step ahead. So why, in this moment, would she suddenly lose that ability? She didn't. She stayed ahead by saying nothing, forcing everyone, audience, press, even Charles himself, to interpret her silence however they wished. And that, my friends, is control. But control comes at a cost. Meghan's silence, instead of shielding Harry, left him exposed. It drew a stark, almost brutal contrast between them. The composed Duchess and the panicked prince. It made Harry look weaker, smaller, and whether intentional or not, it placed Meghan above him in the eyes of millions. Here's where the emotional beat hits hardest. Imagine being Harry in that moment. Your world crumbling, your father exposing your son's legitimacy, your reputation shredded before millions. And you look to the one person you trust most, the one person who has always promised to protect you from the palace, from the press, from the pain. But instead of defending you, she stares straight ahead, silent, unreadable. That's not just silence. That's isolation. That's betrayal wrapped in composure. And yet, here's the contradiction that makes this moment so gripping. Meghan's silence may have saved her. Because while Harry panicked, Meghan didn't give the press the headline they wanted. She didn't give Charles the reaction he might have been hoping for. By refusing to flinch, she denied everyone else control over her image. She let Harry collapse while she remained intact. Cold. Perhaps. Brilliant. Absolutely. Insiders later whispered that Meghan's silence was her strategy all along. Some claim she had rehearsed it. Calm breathing, neutral expressions, a refusal to react under pressure. And if that's true, then the question becomes, what did she know beforehand? Had she seen the DNA whispers? Had she heard the palace rumors? Did she accept that the monarchy would eventually strike back? Because her silence suggested acceptance, not surprise. But here's where the suspense thickens. Silence only works for so long. In a family built on duty and blood, silence becomes suspicion. The public begins to fill in the blanks, to assign meaning where none is spoken. Was Meghan's silence guilt? Was it pride? Was it confirmation of Charles's words without her ever saying a syllable? That's the danger of silence. It gives away nothing, but it invites everything. The middle of this chapter digs into the emotional contradiction. Meghan's silence steadied her, but it destroyed Harry. He needed her voice, her touch, her defense. She gave him none of it. And as the world watched the prince panic while his wife remained composed, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, Meghan didn't look like the victim anymore. She looked like the strategist, the woman who, even when accused, refused to lose control. And here's where irony slashes deepest. Meghan has always painted the monarchy as a cold, unfeeling institution that refused to protect her. Yet on that stage, she became the cold, unfeeling figure who refused to protect Harry. The roles reversed. The victim became the strategist. The husband became the sacrifice. Ask yourself, was this silence loyalty to Harry's truth or loyalty to her own survival? The cameras loved it. Social media erupted. Clips of Harry's panic went viral, but just as viral were still shots of Meghan's face. Calm, unmoving, inscrutable. The memes poured in. She knew. She rehearsed this. Ice Queen Meghan. The internet became the stage where Meghan's silence was debated more fiercely than Charles's words. And here lies the cliffhanger. Meghan's silence didn't just protect her image. It hinted at something more sinister. Because silence in a moment of exposure doesn't always mean dignity. Sometimes, it means you've already moved your pieces on the board. Sometimes, it means you're waiting for the next move, the move no one else saw coming. So while Harry panicked and Charles declared, Meghan's silence wasn't the end of her role. It was the beginning. Because what she would do with that silence next would change everything. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a fist or stamp a foot. Instead, King Charles spoke with the kind of chilling composure that only a man who has lived through scandal after scandal could summon. His words didn't need theatrics. They carried their own weight. Centuries of monarchy, centuries of bloodlines, centuries of unbroken legacy, all condensed into a few carefully chosen syllables. And it was those syllables, delivered live before millions, that sent shockwaves across the courtyard and around the globe. Let's take a step back for a second. Imagine the atmosphere before Charles spoke. The courtyard was restless, the audience confused by Harry's visible panic, Meghan's unnerving silence. Even the seasoned reporters fidgeted, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The cameras adjusted, zooming closer to the king's face. His jaw was set. His eyes, sharp, cold, unblinking, locked not on the crowd, but on Harry. It was a father addressing his son, but it was also a king addressing his kingdom. That double weight gave the moment its unbearable intensity. And then, he leaned forward. Just slightly. Enough for the microphones to catch every syllable, enough to draw every ear closer. He didn't rush. He let the silence build until it felt suffocating. And when he finally spoke, the words cut through the air like a blade. Archie Harrison is not his son. The words themselves were simple, but their effect? Catastrophic. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Reporters scrambled, pens flying across notepads, fingers hammering on keyboards. The silence that followed was deafening, not because no one spoke, but because no one could. It was the kind of silence that only comes when truth collides with illusion. The kind of silence that swallows oxygen from the air. And Harry? He froze. His face drained of color, his lips parted as if to protest, but no sound escaped. His eyes widened, darting desperately toward Meghan, then toward the audience, as though searching for someone, anyone, to rescue him. But there was no rescue. Not this time. Now let's dissect Charles's delivery. He didn't ramble. He didn't accuse Meghan outright. He didn't even offer context. He simply declared. That's the power of monarchy. Truth, when spoken by a king, becomes proclamation. And proclamation, in this context, becomes devastation. It wasn't just Charles's words that shattered the illusion. It was the authority behind them. No one else in the family could have done this. Not William. Not Camilla. Not even palace officials. Only the king could make the declaration live. And only the king could ensure the world believed it. Why? Because Charles understands something Harry never did. Monarchy is performance, but it is also permanence. Scandals can be denied. Rumors can be dismissed. But when a king speaks, history records it as fact. Now ask yourself, why did Charles do it? Why not keep the whispers behind closed doors, as royals have done for centuries? Was it revenge? Was it desperation? Or was it strategy? Consider this. Harry and Meghan had spent years hurling accusations at the monarchy. Racism, neglect, emotional cruelty. Their interviews had painted Charles as an uncaring father, more crown than man. Each time, the palace stayed silent. Never complain, never explain. But silence can also be a trap. And maybe, just maybe. Charles had been waiting for the perfect moment to break it. And what a moment he chose. Live, public, irrefutable. The world wasn't reading this revelation from a tabloid. They weren't hearing it whispered by palace sources. They were watching the King of England speak it himself, unflinching. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was royal decree. The emotional beat here is devastating. Imagine Harry, the boy who had always felt second best, the spare, who fought for love, for freedom, for the right to live on his own terms. And then, in one strike, his father tells the world, "Your son is not your own." That's not just betrayal. That's annihilation. And Meghan? Her mask didn't crack. If anything, Charles's words made her silence look all the more deliberate. The cameras swung to her, desperate for reaction, but Meghan gave them nothing. She became the eye of the storm, calm, still, unreadable. And that silence allowed speculation to swirl. Did she know? Had she orchestrated this? Was her composure proof of guilt or proof of power? Meanwhile, Charles continued, his words deliberate, his tone icy. He didn't embellish. He didn't explain. He left the bombshell to detonate on its own. That was the genius of it. He didn't need to provide evidence. Not yet. The weight of his authority alone was enough to send shockwaves through the monarchy, through the press, through every household watching. And here's the contradiction. Charles had been criticized his entire life for being weak. Too emotional. Too indecisive. Forever in the shadow of Diana's charisma. But in this moment, he was none of those things. In this moment, he was steel. Cold, precise, calculated. He wasn't Charles the man, or Charles the father. He was Charles the king. And that made his words unassailable. But let's pause. Because while the king's chilling words broke the illusion for the world, they also created a new, more dangerous question. If Archie isn't Harry's son, then whose son is he? And Charles didn't answer that. He left it hanging, a question suspended like a sword above Harry and Meghan's heads. The silence after the declaration was almost worse than the words themselves. It wasn't just revelation. It was accusation. Think about how the monarchy works. Bloodlines aren't just family. They're the foundation. They determine titles, succession, legitimacy. And in one sentence, Charles placed a dagger at the heart of that foundation. If Archie wasn't Harry's son, then the Sussex narrative collapsed. Their child, their family, their legacy, it all crumbled under suspicion. And here's where the real drama begins. Charles didn't just wound Harry. He cornered him. By saying it live, before millions, he forced Harry into an impossible choice. Deny it, and risk being humiliated by proof later. Accept it, and lose his identity as Archie's father forever. Silence, too, would be damning. Every option led to destruction. The king knew exactly what he was doing. His words weren't just chilling. They were surgical. And Harry, caught between truth and legacy, was left gasping in their aftermath. The courtyard sat frozen. The cameras stayed locked. And the world leaned forward in disbelief. Because if the king could say that on live television, what else was he holding back? What other secrets were buried in palace vaults, waiting to be unleashed? And here lies the cliffhanger. Charles's chilling words weren't the end of the story. They were the opening shot. A declaration that shattered illusions, yes, but also a declaration that raised new, more dangerous questions. Because if Archie isn't Harry's son, then who is he really? And that question would ignite a firestorm no one was prepared for. Who is Archie Harrison, really? That's the question that detonated like dynamite the moment King Charles declared Harry wasn't his father. The cameras caught Harry's panic, Meghan's silence, and Charles's chilling authority, but the explosion that followed was centered on Archie himself. A child barely known to the public, hidden behind carefully curated photographs, rarely seen in person, and yet suddenly thrust into the center of the greatest royal scandal of the modern era. From the moment of his birth, Archie's identity was wrapped in mystery. Think back. When William and Kate had their children, we saw the hospital steps, the christenings, the public appearances. George, Charlotte, Louis. Each child was introduced to the world as a royal heir in waiting. But Archie? He was different from the very start. No hospital steps. No grand christening with rows of royals in attendance. Just fragments, an arm, a hand, a fuzzy photograph released to the press. Meghan and Harry claimed it was about privacy. But now, with Charles's words echoing in our ears, that privacy looks a lot more like concealment. Let's dig deeper. If Archie isn't Harry's son, then who is he? That's the question the world began asking, and the theories spread like wildfire. Some pointed to the whispers of surrogacy that had followed Meghan from the beginning. Theories about baby bumps that looked inconsistent, about hospital records that never matched, about photos that seemed staged. Others whispered darker rumors about donors, about arrangements kept in strict secrecy, about the possibility that Archie's biological father wasn't royal at all. Ask yourself, why would Charles risk everything by speaking those words live, unless he had something to back them up? He's not a man prone to reckless gambles. For decades, he endured humiliation in silence. He never lashed out when tabloids crucified him during the Diana years. He stayed quiet when Meghan accused the family of racism. But here, he chose to speak. That means evidence exists. Perhaps DNA tests quietly done, results never leaked until now. Perhaps whispers from insiders who knew the truth but stayed silent until the king himself broke it open. Either way, this wasn't speculation anymore. This was proclamation. And Harry knew it. That's why his panic deepened. His life as Archie's father wasn't just about love, it was about legacy. Archie wasn't just his child. He was the bridge that connected Harry to the future of the monarchy, whether Harry wanted that connection or not. Without Archie, Harry was the spare, with no heir. A man adrift, his bloodline severed from royal destiny. Here's the emotional weight. Imagine realizing that the child you raised, protected, loved, isn't biologically yours, and that the world now knows it, too. That isn't just humiliation. It's identity theft on a scale only a prince could feel. Harry wasn't just losing his son. He was losing his story, his fatherhood, his place in history. And what about Meghan? If Charles's declaration was true, then her silence takes on an even darker meaning. Did she know all along? Did she keep the secret from Harry? Or was Harry complicit, part of a cover-up that spiraled beyond his control? The world didn't know. But Meghan's stillness, her refusal to react, suggested she wasn't shocked. And that silence led many to believe she knew. Let's not forget the wider family. William, watching from the sidelines, surely understood the nuclear impact of his father's words. As heir to the throne, he had everything to gain from the truth. The line of succession would remain secure with his children, George, Charlotte, Louis. But what about Camilla? What about Princess Anne? Insiders later whispered that even they looked blindsided by the king's declaration. If Charles had kept this knowledge close to his chest, it meant he had been preparing for this moment carefully, deliberately, waiting until the world was watching. And then came the media frenzy. Within seconds, headlines erupted. "Who is Archie Harrison?" screamed across television tickers. Twitter exploded with theories. Some users posted side-by-side photos of Archie and Harry, pointing out differences in hair, skin tone, even facial structure. Others defended Meghan and Harry, accusing Charles of weaponizing a child in his war against them. But the damage was done. Archie's identity was no longer private. It was public property, dissected and debated by millions. Now, let's bring the emotional pulse back to the family. Archie is innocent, a child caught in the middle of a battle of titans. He didn't choose secrecy. He didn't choose controversy. Yet his very existence now threatened to unravel the monarchy. And that's the tragedy. When Charles declared him not Harry's son, he didn't just wound Harry. He placed Archie at the center of a storm no child should endure. But here's the irony. Charles's words may have protected the monarchy even as they destroyed Harry. Because if Archie isn't of royal blood, then he cannot threaten the succession. He cannot challenge George, Charlotte, or Louis. He cannot be a pawn in Meghan and Harry's transatlantic ambitions. By exposing the truth, Charles stripped Meghan and Harry of their most powerful card, their son. The contradictions are staggering. Meghan and Harry claimed they wanted privacy, yet they built an empire selling their story. They positioned Archie as the victim of royal racism, yet now his very bloodline was being questioned. They claimed to leave the monarchy for freedom, yet their entire relevance hinged on Archie's place within it. And with one declaration, Charles destroyed that relevance. But here's the cliffhanger that keeps us all hooked. If Archie isn't Harry's son, then who is his real father? Was it an anonymous donor? A secret relationship? A palace arrangement buried in secrecy? Or something even more shocking? Something that could still emerge, waiting to be revealed in letters, leaks, or hidden files. The stage was no longer about Charles, Harry, or Meghan. It was about Archie, and his identity, once carefully shielded, now brutally exposed, had become the question that could burn the monarchy to the ground. And just when the world thought it couldn't get darker, whispers of hidden DNA files began to circulate. Files that didn't just hint at scandal, they confirmed it. But the revelation of those files would make Charles's words look like a whisper compared to the roar that followed. DNA never lies. That's the brutal truth that hovered over the monarchy the moment King Charles declared Archie wasn't Harry's son. Words can be dismissed. Accusations can be denied. Rumors can be laughed off. But DNA? DNA is cold. DNA is final. DNA is the kind of truth you cannot charm away, cannot spin, cannot bury. And that is exactly why whispers of hidden DNA files sent the monarchy and the world into chaos. Let's rewind. The king's chilling words had already set fire to the public imagination. But almost immediately, reporters and insiders began asking the same question. Where was the proof? Surely a monarch, cautious to a fault, would never risk declaring something so devastating unless he had ironclad evidence to back it up. That evidence, palace sources whispered, was in the form of DNA testing quietly conducted behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. Here's where it gets sinister. These tests weren't new. Rumors suggest they dated back to Archie's earliest days. Some claim discrepancies arose during routine medical checks, discrepancies that raised eyebrows among palace doctors. Others say suspicions had been brewing from the very moment Meghan appeared in public with her much-debated pregnancy bump, leading to speculation of surrogacy. Whether through whispers or suspicions, the palace apparently sought the truth the only way it could be found, in blood. Imagine the scene. Samples discreetly collected, perhaps under the guise of medical care. Results delivered not through press leaks, not through tabloids, but straight to the king's desk. Numbers, percentages, undeniable markers. One name missing. One truth impossible to ignore. Harry's DNA did not match Archie's. And here's the cruel twist. Some insiders suggest Harry himself may never have been told directly. That the palace sat on the results, waiting for the moment to use them as a weapon if necessary. Can you imagine the betrayal? To raise a child believing he was your blood, only to learn your father, the king, had known the truth all along? The emotional weight of that revelation is almost unbearable. Let's pause and ask the hard question. Why did Charles wait? Why not confront Harry privately years ago? Why hold this card until now? Because timing is everything. Had he revealed it during Meghan's pregnancy, it would have looked like cruelty. Had he revealed it during Harry's explosive interviews, it would have looked defensive. But here, live, public, undeniable, it became not a father's cruelty, but a monarch's proclamation. The perfect moment to silence Harry and Meghan, to reclaim control of the narrative once and for all. But the world didn't stop at the king's words. They wanted the files. They wanted proof. And soon, whispers of DNA documents began leaking into the media. Confidential reports. Lab results. Initials blacked out, but numbers intact. Journalists claimed to have seen percentages that left no room for doubt. And while the palace never officially confirmed these leaks, their silence was damning. Silence in the face of denial is often as good as confirmation. Now, think of Harry in this moment. The man who had built his post-royal life around the image of being a devoted husband and father. The man who had positioned Archie as both shield and weapon, shield against accusations, weapon against the monarchy. And suddenly, that foundation crumbled. Imagine the terror of knowing not just your father, but the entire world was about to see scientific evidence that shattered your identity. The emotional beat here is raw. Harry wasn't just being told he wasn't Archie's father. He was being scientifically erased from the boy's life. Every memory, every bedtime story, every moment of holding his son suddenly overshadowed by percentages printed on sterile white paper. Numbers that screamed, not yours. Numbers that mocked, you've been fooled. Numbers that left him hollow. And Meghan? Here's where the contradictions explode. If she knew, then her silence during Charles's declaration becomes the silence of complicity. If she didn't know, then she too was blindsided, though her composure suggests otherwise. Either way, the DNA bombshell dragged her deeper into suspicion. Was this why she fought so hard for privacy around Archie? Was this why photos were scarce, why details were vague? Why the Sussexes bristled at any questions about their children. What once looked like a plea for protection now looked like a cover-up. The public went wild. Headlines screamed, DNA bombshell rocks monarchy. Social media dissected every rumor, every file, every blurry screenshot of alleged documents. Some defended Meghan, claiming the monarchy had fabricated results to destroy her credibility. Others pointed to years of speculation and insisted the bombshell proved what they had always suspected. The debate wasn't just about Archie anymore. It was about trust. Who could the world believe? Harry and Meghan, who had spun narratives for years, or the king, whose words were now seemingly backed by science? And here's where irony slices deep. Harry had once accused the monarchy of planting stories, of manipulating the press. But now, with DNA files surfacing, it looked like the monarchy hadn't planted anything. They had simply waited for the truth to bloom. Harry, the master of public confessions, was suddenly silenced by cold, clinical evidence. But let's dig into the human tragedy. DNA doesn't care about love. DNA doesn't care about bedtime stories, laughter, or tears. It doesn't care about the man who carried Archie on his shoulders or kissed him goodnight. DNA is brutal. And for Harry, that brutality was a death sentence of identity. Because no matter how much he loved Archie, no matter how much Archie loved him, the world now saw only the science. And yet, the most haunting question remains. Who is Archie's real father? The files proved who it wasn't, but they didn't say who it was. That gap, that unanswered void, became the new obsession. Was it a donor? Was it someone from Meghan's past? Was it part of a surrogacy arrangement hidden behind palace walls? The files only deepened the mystery, and Charles, ever deliberate, refused to fill in the blanks. Which brings us to the cliffhanger. The DNA bombshell didn't end the scandal, it expanded it. Because proving Archie wasn't Harry's son didn't just expose a lie. It created a vacuum, a haunting, unbearable question that could topple not just Meghan and Harry, but the monarchy itself. And the first whispers of that question began to echo even as the files leaked. If Harry isn't Archie's father, then who is? And the answer, buried in shadows, whispered in corridors, hidden in letters, would prove more explosive than the bombshell itself. The world thrives on scandal, but nothing ignites it faster than royalty. And when the DNA bombshell burst into the open, the media didn't just cover the story, they devoured it. Within minutes of Charles's declaration, television screens across the globe lit up with breaking banners. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with hashtags. Hashtag ArchieTruth, hashtag Royal Bombshell, hashtag Not His Son. It wasn't just a story, it was the story. The monarchy, once a fortress of secrecy, had been cracked wide open, and the press wasted no time pouring gasoline on the fire. Picture it. News anchors fumbling through hastily rewritten scripts as wires buzzed with updates from reporters in the courtyard. The King of England has just announced, one anchor gasped, before pausing, visibly stunned. The footage replayed on loop. Charles leaning forward, his icy words echoing. Harry's face draining of color, Meghan's mask of silence. Every outlet seized the images, replaying them frame by frame, dissecting every twitch, every glance, every silence as if decoding a crime scene. But the frenzy didn't stop at television. Social media became the true battlefield. Memes flooded timelines, split screens comparing Archie to Harry and Charles, captions screaming, "We should have known." Amateur sleuths shared side-by-side photos of Archie at different ages, circling supposed inconsistencies in his appearance. Some posts went viral claiming Archie looked more like a Hollywood producer than a Windsor. Others argued the monarchy had gone too far, weaponizing a child for revenge. The digital firestorm was merciless, and Archie's identity was no longer a private matter. It was public currency. And here's where it turned even uglier. Tabloids that once praised Meghan's motherhood now published double-page spreads asking, "Who is Archie really?" One splashed an alleged DNA report across its cover, bold letters screaming, "The files that prove it." Another featured royal experts debating paternity like sports commentators analyzing a game replay. Even respectable outlets joined the feeding frenzy. The BBC, CNN, Sky News, they all ran endless panels with commentators, psychologists, historians, and even geneticists weighing in. Suddenly, Archie wasn't a child. He was a case study. Let me ask you this. How does a family survive when its most vulnerable member becomes the world's most dissected headline? Harry, once praised for protecting his son from the spotlight, now found Archie in it more than ever. This time not as a prince-in-waiting, but as the boy whose father wasn't his father. The cruelty was unbearable, yet unstoppable. And Meghan? Her silence on stage had sparked a tidal wave of speculation online. Clips of her stillness went viral under captions like, "She knew." Hashtags like #IceQueen trended for hours. Some praised her composure as strength. Others condemned it as guilt. Late-night comedians mocked Harry's panic while portraying Meghan as cold and calculating. The divide sharpened. She was either the mastermind or the martyr. There was no middle ground. Meanwhile, commentators in Britain erupted with debates about the monarchy's survival. If Charles is willing to expose this live, what else is he hiding? One columnist wrote. Another countered. He has saved the monarchy by cutting out the cancer of lies. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was politics. It was succession. It was the survival of the crown itself. But the frenzy wasn't limited to the press. Politicians weighed in. Some in Parliament called for inquiries into how much taxpayer money had gone towards supporting the Sussexes and their child. Others warned that dragging Archie into the spotlight was cruel, a line the monarchy should never have crossed. Suddenly, what began as a family scandal had become a national debate. And across the Atlantic, America roared with its own fury. Talk shows and podcasts dedicated entire episodes to the Archie scandal. Oprah's name trended again, with clips from her infamous 2021 interview resurfacing. Viewers now re-examining Meghan's words, asking if she had lied to Oprah's face. American networks, once sympathetic to the Sussexes' claims of racism, now hesitated, unsure whether they had been manipulated. The tide that once carried Meghan and Harry to Hollywood stardom was turning against them. Here's where the emotional spike hits. Harry and Meghan built their new life on controlling their narrative. They left the palace claiming freedom, privacy, the ability to tell their own truth. But when the DNA bombshell broke, they lost that control entirely. The press they had once accused of cruelty now held all the cards. Every whisper, every rumor, every doctored file was magnified into headlines. And for the first time, Harry and Meghan weren't the storytellers. They were the story, and not in the way they wanted. The contradictions became unbearable. The couple who sued tabloids for privacy were now splashed across every front page, their child's identity the subject of global speculation. The couple who decried royal cruelty now seemed powerless against a cruelty even sharper, public humiliation by science. The couple who accused the monarchy of destroying their peace now looked like they had built their lives on a lie exposed by the very institution they tried to escape. But the frenzy didn't just expose Meghan and Harry. It exposed cracks in the monarchy itself. Some commentators asked, why now? Why did Charles choose this moment? Was it desperation? Was it vengeance for years of attacks? Or was it a carefully orchestrated strategy to reclaim control after years of being painted as the villain? Whatever the reason, the press didn't care. They had their scandal. And scandals sell. The frenzy reached such a fever pitch that protests even broke out. In London, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, some holding signs demanding answers, others condemning the monarchy for weaponizing a child. In Los Angeles, Meghan's supporters rallied, claiming the revelation was a smear campaign against a woman of color. Two continents, two narratives, one explosive scandal tearing across the world. And through it all, Harry's image became the symbol of the chaos. The panicked prince, eyes wide, sweat on his brow, lips trembling. That single frame circulated millions of times online, turning him into a meme, a headline, a cautionary tale. The world no longer saw the war veteran, the grieving son, the husband fighting for love. They saw a man undone by truth. But here's the cliffhanger. The media frenzy, for all its noise, only scratched the surface. Because behind the headlines and hashtags, whispers began to emerge of something darker. Letters, files, hidden communications that hinted at an even deeper conspiracy about Archie's true origins. The press had the story of the century, but the real story hadn't even begun. Because if the DNA bombshell rocked the monarchy, what came next threatened to destroy it. Imagine it. The king has just detonated the bombshell of a lifetime. The courtyard still echoes with gasps. Reporters are firing off frantic updates, and Meghan's silence has already become a weapon of its own. But at the very center of it all, one man is unraveling, Prince Harry. For years, he's painted his father as distant, cold, and unfeeling. For years, he's accused the monarchy of betrayal. Yet now, in front of millions, it is Harry himself who has been betrayed, and there's no escaping the confrontation that follows. Let's set the scene. The cameras are still rolling, locked onto Harry's face, drinking in every twitch of panic. But the public moment is over. The declaration has been made. What follows happens in the shadows, in the private corridors behind the stage. Yet inevitably, leaks ensure the world hears whispers of it. Harry doesn't walk away. He doesn't retreat. He does what a cornered son must. He confronts his father. Think about the irony. Harry, the boy who once idolized his father, the man who once stood beside him in grief at Diana's funeral, now standing across from him with fire in his eyes. But this isn't the fire of rebellion. It's desperation. It's pleading. Because in that moment, Harry is less a prince and more a broken man. Why? That's the first word insiders claim he spat out. One word loaded with decades of pain. Why expose this? Why now? Why me? Why Archie? But Charles doesn't flinch. He's lived through confrontation his whole life. Parliament, the press, Diana, Camilla. He doesn't see a son before him. He sees a man who has spent years undermining the monarchy. And in Charles's mind, this was justice. Harry presses harder. His voice, hoarse with panic, rises in a plea that borders on begging. You didn't have to do this. Not like this. The desperation is palpable. He isn't denying the claim. Not fully. He's begging for dignity, for mercy, for his FA.